He's
currently
currently
working with Netflix for an upcoming animated series. So, Pete Michels, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here speaking at the Quark series. Um, so should I just go ahead and take it?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I welcome everybody, and I'm so happy to be here talking about animation and a little bit about my career and some of the technology and creativity that goes into it. Um, uh, As Noah said, I have worked on I've been fortunate enough to work on so many shows. It's been really, I've been very lucky that I've been in the right place at the right time. Got out of school and The Simpsons was hiring, so I just jumped right in and never looked back. Um, Originally, I studied design and illustration back in the East Coast of the United States, and then outside of New York, and then moved to Los Angeles to go to UCLA. Is where I studied animation. Um, and then right into it. I just got hired on The Simpsons, had to take a test, and went right into it from there. And I wanted to kind of go a little bit on some of the technology of animation. Um, Animation, actually, a lot of people don't realize it goes back 20, 30,000 years, believe it or not. I came across something that was very interesting, that there's cave paintings in France that actually have animated images on them. They don't, obviously they didn't have the technology yet to animate them, but they were already thinking in terms of drawing movement and drawing motion. And I'm going to share with you a little bit, just a couple of quick images, if I can find them. Let's see. There is, there we go. I'll pull it up real quick and I'll share this image with you. Oops. Now I have my computer's, there we go. I'm going to share this image, present it, just a window. Now, if you look, can you, everybody, I hope you can see that image. If you look at that buffalo, it's actually how many legs it has. It has extra legs. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 legs in the front, 4 legs in the back. They're actually animating, thinking of movement. They're already making that buffalo run and thinking in terms of he's got, when they run, it seems like they've got more legs. So they're already thinking in terms of how things are moving. And if you look, another image I have is a disc. Pull this one up. I'll stop sharing this one and present another one. This one is going to baffled archaeologists for quite a while. What it is, it's a disc, and this is it's a disc with a hole in it, but it's got a deer on one side standing and a deer on the other side. This is the opposite side. And then when you took them a long time to figure out what this was, but when you put a string through it and you spin it, you can see it'll make the deer, it'll look like the deer's running. So this is actually pose A and pose B. This is the basic animation theory. You have 2 poses and you cycle them, you flip them back and forth, and it appears to run. Now, the fascinating thing about that is that this was dated to about 25, 30,000 years ago. So again, the technology was already there. There were artists were already thinking in terms of how to make things move, which was fascinating to me. Jump ahead to 30,000 years later, and there's me at UCLA. Just finished all my studies and didn't know what I was going to do. I was thinking I was going to move back to New York, and then a new show came out called The Simpsons, and who'd have thought that it was going to run 30 years, 20, what is it? It's like, it's almost season 30 now. I know people that have worked on the show since the beginning, and they've worked on the whole show, that one show, that whole time. And it's amazing that was one of the first adult animated shows. Before that, most animated shows were considered for children. There were a couple of them that had come and gone in the 70s and 1970s. I think there was a show called Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. There was, and some films that were more geared toward adults rather than children, like Ralph Bakshi's, some of Ralph Bakshi's work, like Fritz the Cat, or even Heavy Metal. And this is way back in the 70s and 80s. But those movies, those were kind of a rarity, an anomaly. But for the most part, movies, animation, TV animation was all considered for children. And it took a long time to break that mold. And I think The Simpsons did break that mold by having shows that were had adult themes in them. Not it was like nothing that you couldn't watch with your kids, but it wasn't just for children. It was shows about stories about families and Homer's job, and just Homer going down to the bar and drinking beer with his friends. It was um, not just focused for kids. And then that opened the door to shows like Family Guy and a lot of the Adult Swim shows like South Park, Rick and Morty. It all started with The Simpsons. And right about the time The Simpsons came out, also another blockbuster movie came out that revitalized the animation industry, which was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. When that movie came out, it made studios stand up and look and go, oh, we can make money off animation. Because I remember hearing things when I was still in animation school that, oh, animation's dead, and studios aren't going to want to put money behind animation because it doesn't make any money. And then boom, Simpsons and Roger Rabbit come out, and we're still in a boom. We're in a second boom now, another boom. That first wave of animation really kicked off studios like Nickelodeon and the Disney had always been making movies and TV shows, but all of a sudden there was the Disney Channel, and then there was Cartoon Network, which was devoted exclusively to cartoons for kids, and Nickelodeon started doing cartoons, and the Ren and Stimpy launched Nickelodeon pretty much with Nickelodeon, and was started out with their first three shows were Ren and Stimpy, Doug, and Rugrats. And after that, they then realized, hey, we can do this ourselves, and they started up Nickelodeon Studios with Rocko's Modern Life. And I was fortunate to get onto that show between seasons of Simpsons, because the way it works, you're working on a show. Sometimes your schedule takes you 9 months to do all the series in that season, and then sometimes you have a 2 or 3 month hiatus. So between the seasons of Simpsons, I would go and work on Rugrats, or I would work on Rocko's Modern Life, and then go back to Simpsons for the new season. But to get the job on The Simpsons, I had to take a test. So, and testing is still in the animation industry still kind of a controversial subject, because when you're coming right out of college and you don't really have a portfolio, the way to get into the business is to take a test. A lot of tests there's still testing going on, and testing means that what it is like an audition. Like if you're an actor, you go read for a part, and if you get the part, you get the part. Otherwise, you go down there and you read the part, and you might not get it. It's the same with animation. So you take a test. You might get a storyboard test where they give you a page of script and you have to storyboard it, or they give you a design and say, okay, here, you draw a human character and a robot and a monster, and then you have to come up with monsters. Then you'd have to draw turnarounds, and I'll give you some examples of that. But my first test for The Simpsons, I was given a storyboard and a dialogue track, and I had to draw several poses of Homer and Bart playing video games. And I was terrible. I had no idea how to break down characters, because there's a bit of a science to it. Like you don't just draw the character on the outline. You have to break the character down into shapes. So like Homer Simpson he's basically a sphere with kind of a shoulders, and then his arms are like noodles, and his shoulders are teacups, and his head is like a hot dog or sausage. So and then you have a center line, so when you turn the characters how to pose them. And my very first time drawing Homer Simpson was terrible. I really didn't know my way around how to draw characters and how to break them down and pose them. So I took the test a couple times, and I can show you. It's kind of embarrassing now, but I'll show you my very first Simpson drawing, and it is embarrassing, and I'm not afraid to show it this many years later. In fact, I look at it now. It's kind of funny to look at now. Um, but for a long time, I don't know if you can see that. For a long time, I had this drawing in front of my desk at work, and every time I had a tough time drawing something or couldn't draw something, sometimes you have you hit a roadblock and you're like, this just isn't coming out well. And I would look at that drawing of Homer and go, okay, it could be worse. I could still be drawing like that. But I got better at it, and I'm going to show you now a revised. I went back in and revised it, and you can see the difference. I'll stop showing that one and put up this other one, which is a more improved Homer Simpson. This one is, as you can see, hopefully you can see that. This is my original bad drawing of Homer, and I went back and later on I went over it, and you can see the blue lines on the one on the right. You can see the blue lines, how I kind of deconstructed the character into shapes. It's almost like if you're thinking of it as in terms of a wireframe. So you can see the blue lines. You can see his shoulders here, and his torso, and his torso and his hips are kind of a circle sitting on the couch, and you can see even in his eyes, like I'd have the center line down the center of his head, so I know where to put the eyes, and then the nose comes out of that. And then even his hands are a little circle with the fingers coming out of it. So that's the way you kind of break down characters. And as you can see on my original drawing on paper, I didn't know how to do that, and did not pass the test. But what they liked about my test, I was able to draw backgrounds and perspectives. So I was originally hired as a background artist. And what a background artist does is just that, draws the background. So the way it's broken down, you have a storyboard. You start with the script, and then you storyboard the script with the dialogue first. You always want to have the dialogue track recorded first. So we have to start with the script, then we go record the actors saying the lines, and then we put that together, string it together. And today we use Premiere or an Avid system to string the dialogue together. And we'll take the best takes that we like, string it all together, and then we'll draw to that. So we'll do a storyboard based on that. And for the storyboard, we figure out all the shots, different angles, where the camera is. The camera's in your mind. So it's not really a real movie camera, but the movie camera is your eye. So we storyboard that, and then it goes to layout, and the character layouts, the characters, artists draw the characters and pose those out just like you would in TV. It's more done in storyboards. Everything's really done in storyboards, but at that time, the character layout department posed out the characters based on the acting. And then my job, they would put a rough background in. So my job as background artist would be to add that background in there, whether it was the couch or the car or the house or whatever is going on in the background behind the characters, so the characters could be drawn into that background. And then from there, it would go to timing, and then color, and final animation, and then painted, and then filmed. Now it's done digitally, where you start with, I'm going to show you a little bit of, you start with the character design also before you start boarding. And here is I'm going to share a character design. So you can see we have to start with the design so that everybody draws the character the same. Because a lot of times we have, on any given show, we have about 100 people drawing the characters. So this is a turnaround. So this is Peter Griffin. This is Brian from Family Guy. And what you're seeing here is a turnaround. So we see that Brian, the dog, we see him from every single angle. We see him from the back. We see him from the rear 3/4, front 3/4 profile on the side. And also this tells us how tall he is compared to Peter. And this way we can all see what Brian looks like, so everybody draws him the same. The goal is to make it look like one person drew the whole show. Doesn't always come out that way, but that's our goal. So that's a turnaround. That's a design turnaround. Why can I stop? How come I cannot stop sharing? Where is the stop share button? There it is. And from there, it goes into the storyboards. And then for storyboards, we use a program called, in TV animation, we use a program called Storyboard Pro, which is made by Toon Boom in Canada. And here is, where is it? Where is it? I'll just find, oh, not that one, that one. Here we go. Here is, there we go. This is, I'll show you a screen grab of, this is typically what a storyboard looks like. There we go. And I'll share this one. This is what it looks like when we do our storyboards. So this is a screen grab from the my desktop of what our storyboards look like. As you can see, we start with just a basic black and white drawing. It has layers on the side here, so we have different layers that we can do. All our tools, we can see where we can put the dialogue, action notes, and then down here we have little thumbnail views. We can see there's a bedroom, and there's me waking up in the morning, getting ready to go to work, and then my head explodes. So this way we can see, we can draw the shots out, and there's the background. We put the background layer in, and this describes the action way before it's animated. So so we can kind of plan it all out before we actually animate things. Because once you animate it, it's very labor intensive. So you want to make sure you plan it out well in advance of that. Then once we have all that planned out and the storyboards are done, and we make what we call an animatic of it, which is kind of a pencil test. We take those drawings and we match them to the dialogue and time it all out. Because in a broadcast show, we have 22 minutes. The animation has to fit in, the story has to fit in 22 minutes. For feature animation, it's like you can make the story as long as you need to. It could be anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes, maybe longer. There's no set limit to it. Some of the streaming shows go a little longer. If you notice, like Disenchantment with Matt Groening's new show, sometimes they're not always a half hour. They're not always 22 minutes. Sometimes because streaming, you don't rely on a broadcast schedule. So you can make it 25 minutes. You can make it 20 minutes, whatever it takes to tell the story. So if you notice that the streaming shows, they don't stick to a certain length, but it is still a business. So you do have to, contractually, you're budgeted for like 25 to 30 minutes of animation. So you still want to stick within your budget. And then to make the characters talk, when you're animating, a lot of shows now on TV shows are done in Harmony or Flash. Flash, I think, is kind of on its way out now, but a lot of shows are done in Harmony, which is a 2D program, which is also created by the same company in Canada that does our storyboard program. But to make the characters talk, each sound has a mouth shape to it. So, and for instance, this is a basic mouth chart. So you can see each mouth position, each mouth drawing, and this is just a layer that we put on top of the character drawing. Sometimes it's involved with the head has to move a little bit more depending on the character, whether it's like maybe it's a dog or something, a talking dog. Well, his whole head has to move. But this case is like, this might be like Rick's mouth that's just on top of his head layer. So each mouth position is labeled with A, B, C, D, E, etc. Some shows have more mouth positions, some have less, but this is the basic standard. So you can see the mouth, the sounds that they make are listed below. So the closed mouth is for the M shapes, the B's, the P's. And as you see the different mouth sounds, as the mouth gets wider, like mouth position D may be for like a character yelling or screaming with an A sound, or an E or I sound. The R sound is kind of an oval shaped mouth. And then the O sound and position F is like, ooh. So when you put these mouth positions in order, and they're usually on 1 or 2 frames, which is like 1/25th of a second. When you put them all in order and you match them to the right sound on that frame, it appears that the character's talking. And you can see there's an L shape with the tongue behind the teeth, and an F and V shape where the teeth go over the lower lip. So this is how we make the characters talk. So just by projecting, and these are on very briefly, like in succession in different order. And so if you slow down a cartoon, you can see the mouths moving, and they will match the phonetic sounds that the character is making. Now I want to show you a little bit of a clip of what is called we call an animatic, which is it's a pencil test of the rough storyboard drawings, and this is just a clip from Family Guy that has Peter Griffin is playing with the blinds on the window. Let me pull this one up. Here we go. Now this just one scene, and it's all one scene. It's all one shot. We don't cut to another scene. When I say cut to another scene, it's just like in film when you're watching a film and you're cutting from interior to inside of a car, and then you cut to a close-up, and then you cut to a wide shot or a two-shot with two characters in it. So each one of those shots is a scene cut. So in this case, in animation, every time we make a new scene cut, we have to make a new background, or if it's a new angle, we have to. And the backgrounds are usually generated in Photoshop. They're designed in Photoshop, and we bring them in Photoshop into the Harmony program. Every time we have a new angle, we have to do an entirely new background, and that includes also things like if a character is walking behind a chair. Well, the chair has to be separated out and a prop so the character can walk behind it. The same if the character sits at a table or sits at a chair or walks behind another character or even picks up a cup of coffee. That cup of coffee is considered a prop, so that the character can pick it up, and it's not part of the background. So when the character lifts the coffee cup up, there's a background behind it. And I will now share with you a little clip of Brian and Peter, and they're in jury duty, so they're it's late at night, and Peter wants to open a window. So hopefully you can see that. Does that okay? Can you see that, Neil? Just nod your head. Okay.
Peter, what are you doing? It's getting very tense in here. Do you guys mind if I struggle to open these blinds? Come on, stay up there.
You gotta yank it to the side, Peter.
I'm yanking it as far as it goes.
You gotta catch it on the thing.
Oh, that's helpful.
The left side's getting lower than the right side.
I can see what's happening.
Now twist it.
All right. See? Now it's open.
And that's one background, but it's 85 poses of Peter trying to open the blinds and close them. And you can see why it's so many is because each one had to be different, because gradually the blinds were lower on one side, and you had to listen for visual cues too. So the one character says off screen, he says, "Oh, the left side's higher than the right side." So that tells me, well, when that character says that, I got to make sure that the left side is higher than the right side to match what the other character is saying. And then when he says, "Oh, I'm pulling it all the way to the side," you got to make sure that when he says that, he's pulling it all the way to the side. So there are little cues that I go off of in the dialogue and in the script. A lot of times there's script direction too. For instance, like some screen directions are short in the script, but they take up a lot of screen time. For instance, the chicken fight. You've all remembered the Family Guy chicken fights, which take 5 minutes of the show. Those are usually like one paragraph in the script, and it just says Peter fights a chicken and then do this, this, and this, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is going to take forever to draw." And once you time it out, it comes about 5 minutes of the show. So it's a little bit deceiving when you think, "Oh, it's a short script," but no, there's a chicken fight. And then once that's kind of timed out, and what we do is, like in the case of Simpsons and Family Guy, the animation, this is everything up to that point is called pre-production. Production is the actual animation. So for Family Guy and Simpsons, those shows are done in Seoul, South Korea. So what we would do is we send those over, that clip, that whole animatic, what we call an animatic, and exposure sheets, which tells them exactly what frame the mouth positions are on, and how we figure out the timing, how many in-betweens, which are the drawings from point A to point B, to smooth out the animation. So we send some instructions along with that and designs. And then the animators overseas will take those drawings and put them on model, which we call on model, clean them up, make the nice, the outlines, and then color them in. They're usually colored in Photoshop. Those shows are both done still by hand, although they're drawn on a computer, but they're still drawn by hand, animated by hand. In the case of Rick and Morty and most shows now, they're done in Harmony, which is a 2D program, which you take those characters and you flesh them out, you build them, or you rig them, or even shows that are CG shows. And I've worked on a couple CG shows, and even those there's still different steps to them. There's different limitations. Like Rick and Morty is done in Canada, Vancouver, Canada. There are some shows that are done in CG or using Maya. I worked on a show, Skylanders Academy, a year or two ago. That was done in Paris, France, and that was all done in Maya. And there are a lot of studios all around the world, from anywhere from Seoul, Mexico, Canada, Toronto, Vancouver in Canada, Paris, France, Ireland. I've worked with Irish studios, and a lot of CG work is done in India. Actually, Hyderabad has a lot of animation studios. In fact, I was just talking to the host earlier that I was in Hyderabad last year, talking to a friend of mine who works as a producer at a studio there. But a lot of CG work is done in India. Now, here is, and there's steps to that too. Here is when we do a CG show with Maya, it's a little different in that we have we don't see a fully animated yet. We see the movement, and it doesn't. They do all the motion first and all the movement first, and then they add this texture and the lighting. So the first thing we see, we get something like I'll just do this one image here. I'll do a different one, a better one. So we'll see something like this. Share this one. Share that. So we start with something like this, and this is if you've seen Skylanders Academy, this is Spyro the dragon, and he's breathing fire at an even bigger dragon, and they're on an asteroid. So there's all these rocks floating around, and there's vines, and this is you can see a little just lines coming out of his mouth. Well, that will be the fire effects and the lightning effects. Right now, this was our motion test. So we just wanted to see that the composition was working. You could see there's the shot and the scene number and the time code. And then once we approve that, then we would get back the final version, which would be something closer to this. And then once you add the lighting and effects, then it looks like that. So there's different steps when you're working in 3D as opposed to 2D. 2D is a little bit simpler, but there are pluses and minuses to each of them. With the 3D, with Maya, like something like this, the characters are already modeled and they're already built, and they already exist in a 3D space. So you can just move the camera wherever you want it. Let's say if I wanted this to be a little bit a slightly different angle, I would just go through it and adjust the camera and then change it, and it would be really easy to change that. But mostly I work with 2D animation, and it's just a little bit harder because you with 2D animation done in a computer program digitally, you are kind of limited in the designs that you do. So you saw the turnarounds we did for Brian. Well, each character has a turnaround, but those characters are rigged at that angle. So if you want to do an extreme upshot or extreme downshot, if you're moving the camera below the character, well, you're looking a completely different angle up, which is easy to change in a 3D show. But with a 2D show, it's not so easy to change because you have to redraw that character, because most of the characters are designed from eye level looking forward. But once I move the camera really extremely one way or another, I have to redraw the character, and that means the rigging is the characters are rigged, which means they're separated by every moving part is separated. So there's the pivot points and the elbows and the hands, and there's different hands, and even the mouth positions are all rigged, and even the eyes are rigged. And it goes through this whole hierarchy of there's a head, and then there's a right eyeball, a right eye, and a left eye, and in the right eye there's the right eyebrow, the right eyelid, upper lid, a lower lid, and then the pupil, and then the eyeball. So it's all broken down to every little shape that you could think of that would move. And it's very complicated, but once you put it all together, you can manipulate those parts to make the character move the way you want it to, and on a timeline. And what I'm going to show you next is a bit from a Simpsons. It was from Rick and Morty. When we did the first season of Rick and Morty, Matt Groening from The Simpsons was a big fan of Rick and Morty. In fact, it was kind of interesting for me personally because I started my career on The Simpsons, and then here I was 20-something years later working on a couch gag for The Simpsons for Rick and Morty. And there I was getting to draw Homer Simpson and Ned Flanders again. But Matt Groening was such a fan of the show, we had him do a DVD commentary. So if you ever got a chance to look at the DVD first season of Rick and Morty, and in one of the episodes where Matt Groening is doing a guest commentary, during the commentary he said, would you guys, we want to offer you, we love the show so much, we want Rick and Morty to do a couch gag as the head of a Simpson episode. And the couch gags on Simpsons were always fun to do, and they're usually pretty short. It's where the family runs in and something happens to the couch, or the couch flips over, or there's a monster there, or they fall in the water, or whatever. But with these, recently they've been doing really long ones. I think they did one with Guillermo del Toro that was 2 minutes long. They did one with Bill Plimpton and Don Hertzfeld, and these were really longer couch gags. So they gave us a 2-minute couch gag, and they just gave us the setup. The family runs in to sit on the couch. But Justin Roiland, who does the voice of Rick and Morty, excuse me, and the writers came up with something they said just run with it, just do whatever you want there. So they just wrote something, filled up to 2 minutes, and the Simpson writers and Matt Groening just loved it, and it was a lot of fun to do. It was really kind of time consuming because it was so long and so complicated. But we started with that basic setup we got all the designs from The Simpsons. They sent it over to us digitally. They emailed them to us. They're also digital now too. And then once they wrote it out, Justin recorded Rick, and he recorded Morty. We put that together, and then we storyboarded it. Put that together, and we came up with an animatic. And what I'm going to show you now is I'll show you the animatic of that, so you can see the process. And this is the Simpsons couch gag, the animatic. So it's a storyboard. It's basically a storyboard reel. Let me share that. I'll present that. And share the screen. And there we go.
Oh my God, Morty, what did you do? You killed the Simpsons, Morty!
No, I didn't mean to.
Oh, God, look at the baby one. Oh my God, Morty. Oh my God, look at the little baby one.
God. Oh, no, this is horrible. I killed the Simpsons. You killed the
entire Simpsons, Morty. They're a beloved family, Morty. They're national treasure. You killed them.
I'm just a kid. I don't want to go to jail.
Relax, Morty. Calm down. We'll take care of it. Here. Oh, man. All right, hold this. Okay, I want you to take that bag of Simpsons goo and this picture to this address. They'll make us new Simpsons. You understand me, Morty?
Me? What are you going to do?
Morty, I gotta clean this place up before somebody comes snooping around. You know how many characters there are in The Simpsons, Morty? There's like 1 billion characters. They did an episode where George Bush was their neighbor.
All right, can't argue with that.
And there's some hand-drawn drawings in there that were scanned in. And this was before we added music and everything. We added music and everything last. Music and sound effect come last. Now, some of these monsters we hadn't designed yet either. We were just making it up as we went. And that background is from The Simpsons. That's actually Marge and Homer's bedroom. And you can see that we use color to indicate that that's still The Simpsons and they're the essence of The Simpsons, basically.
Hi, diddly ho, neighbor. Looks like you got a spaceship in your... Who are you?
Now I got to draw Ned Flanders again.
Rick, I'm back. Wake up. Wake up.
Jeez, it's about time, Morty. Give me those. Good enough. I'm driving.
No more best animators, man.
And that's the entire Simpsons couch gag, just the storyboard drawings. That's just the storyboard drawings. So we knew it was like, okay, we made some changes here and there. Like, okay, some things aren't working. We'll flip Ned Flanders a little bit more. We'll change some of the characters in the monster thing. You can also see some Futurama bits in there too. There's I think a spaceship and a couple of characters from Futurama waiting in line. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share. This is what the final animation looked like compared to that. So you'll see some subtle differences, a few changes, and you can see the difference, but it didn't change that much between the storyboard drawings and the color animation. So this was then sent to Canada. They took that and dropped in the characters and that were all pre-designed and pre-rigged and broken down. So then they just would animate to those drawings and the timing that was there. And then until we ended up with this. And then we added the music and sound effects. And that's what we call post-production. The production part is there's pre-production, which is design, writing, recording the dialogue, storyboards. Production is animation. And then post-production, once we get take one back in color, post-production is everything from doing retakes. There might be some technical things like a hand is missing or a mouth is missing. There's some technical things that we have to fix, or maybe a rewrite or costume change. Then also in post-production is the music and sound effects are added, as well as the final mixing and color correction. So now we end up with something like this. And it's only slightly different, but it's you'll see a difference. This one.
Oh my God, Morty, what did you do? You killed us, Simpsons, Morty.
No, I didn't mean to.
Oh,
No, this is
look
horrible.
at the baby one. Oh my God, Morty.
I killed the
You killed the
Simpsons.
entire Simpsons, Morty. They're beloved family, Morty. They're a national treasure. You killed them.
I'm just a kid. I don't want to go to jail.
Relax, Morty. Calm down. We'll take care of it. Oh man. Okay, I want you to take that bag of Simpsons goo and this picture to this address. They'll make us new Simpsons. You understand me, Morty?
Me? What are you gonna do?
Morty, I gotta clean this place up before somebody comes snooping around. You know how many characters there are in The Simpsons, Morty? There's like a billion characters. They did an episode where George Bush was their neighbor.
All right, can't argue with that.
Hi, diddly ho, neighbor. Looks like you got a spaceship in you. Who
Rick, I'm back! Wake up! Wake up!
Jeez, it's about time, Morty. Give me those. I must have used that vial before. Oh well. Let's go. I'm driving this time.
No more guest animators, man.
So you can kind of see the differences. We changed the ending a little bit, so it ended up like Rick had used an old test tube or something and got his own DNA mixed up with the Simpsons. That part where they morph from the eggs into the Rick Simpsons, the morphing, that part had to be animated by hand. So you couldn't use the rigs of the character designs and builds. Something like that, you can only really the best get that effect. You have to animate it by hand. And you also notice like the green portal, every time you see that in Rick and Morty, that green portal that swirls, that's done in another program called After Effects. So a lot of the effects are done with After Effects. You might be familiar with that program that we do in post. But there was always, even the technology in Rick and Morty, within the technology, the writers always told us that whatever you make up, it has to be believable. And there were things like the portal gun. If you notice, Rick always has to point it to a wall or a solid object. He can't just like make it appear out of nowhere. It can appear somewhere else for him to come out of, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a room or in the clouds. But for him to point his portal gun, it has to hit a wall or a car or a window or something. So that we always try to combine the technology and make it somewhat believable. Even the monsters that Morty goes to, that when they put the Simpson goo in and make the eggs, and that all has to somehow make sense. So even though it's farcical and fantastical, it still has to, like, well, in their world, it makes sense. That's how you do things. But I guess, so with the time we have left, I'm going to open it up to some questions. I think we have some questions. Ready, Noah? Are you going to give us some questions?
So anybody in the comment section who wants to ask questions, go ahead. In the meantime, I'll ask the questions that I have.
Okay.
So to begin with, I saw from your website that directing and animation are not the only mediums of art that you're good at. So have you always been artistically inclined? And also, what's your favorite medium of creating art?
I can remember drawing as far back as I hold a pencil. I have my mom had saved, she saved drawings and dated them from like when I was like 4 years old or 3 years old. I used to draw Charlie Brown and Snoopy and cartoon characters. I always loved drawing cartoon characters. And throughout, I used to make cartoons in middle school and high school. I made cartoons of my friends and never thought I'd be actually getting paid to do it. But I always did enjoy painting and other creative art also.
Right.
But I do a lot of watercolor paintings, and I think outside of animation, my favorite medium is watercolor paintings. I do a lot of landscapes. I go outside and I go hiking and take my watercolor paints with me out on the trail, and sometimes I'll sit and paint trees. It's fun and it's relaxing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So India is a very conservative society, and everyone is encouraged to take like the safe path, and that's why a lot of super talented artists find themselves in engineering colleges, living a life that they may not necessarily enjoy because that's what society told them to do.
Yeah.
So for an Indian to decide to become an artist, it would be a huge deal, and they'd usually face significant pushback from their families.
Yeah.
Did you experience anything like this?
Not really. I think my parents knew that I wanted to be an artist since I was young. But I was the first in my family to go to college. Two of my brothers are are truck drivers, and my dad was a welder. My grandfather was a carpenter. So I don't think they ever expected me to go to college and become an artist until at some point they realized, like, oh, he's probably going to want to go to art school.
Right.
But they never discouraged me. They always encouraged me to draw, and they would buy paints and pencils and art supplies. So it was, and once I think it was when I was in high school that they realized, like, that's probably what I want to do with my life. So they were always encouraging. Yeah. So I was very fortunate. But I do know people from different parts of the world whose parents expected them to do different things, and but I think there is once do it, a lot of parents, once they realize that their children can actually support themselves by being an artist. We always think of, when we think of artists, we think of the starving artist living in a loft, downtown, starving and eating the oil paint, because they can't afford food. Yeah. But it's not so much. Once people realize, like, oh, you can actually, support yourself and support a family being an artist. There's so many different fields within art. I mean, there's design and illustration. Everything we see has to be designed by an artist. Every package, every billboard, every car, even buildings have to be designed by architects who are artists also. Movies, television, there are so many opportunities for artists in all over the world and in different mediums.
Do you have any ideas to change this trend?
That's a good question. I think by showcasing it more and showcasing the technology that's used and what it takes to become an artist, so we can kind of take apart that stereotype of the starving artist,
Right.
Buying paint instead of food, that those stereotypes, I guess, I think it's just through education and showcasing what artists really do.
Right.
Would help go a long way to destroy that.
If you had to give some advice to someone who wanted to pursue a career in art, what would it be?
The basics. The most important thing is the basics, to know perspective and know life drawing. Anything you do in art and composition, perspective, life drawing, whether it's humans, animals. I know a lot of the best artists I know are constantly drawing. They're always drawing. Right. They go to the cafe, they go to the coffee shop, they sit there they always bring their sketchbook with them. And they sit there while they're drinking their coffee, they'll sketch, people in the cafe. Or they go to the zoo a lot on the weekends, and they'll sketch animals. They'll sketch elephants and tigers and gorillas, and just to get in order to really draw something and be able to stylize something and break it down to even something that's really stylized, like even a kid's cartoon, you have to know the reality and the physics behind it, and drawing perspective and drawing environments, knowing where to put the horizon line and how the characters fit into that, and that applies to whether it's animation, live action film, drawing, painting, even design, composition. I mean, just even a package design, you have to know the basics of composition, how to make your eye drawn to a certain spot on whether it's a canvas or whether it's a package or a billboard or a magazine ad. You're drawing, and to me that's fascinating. Just like, even if you watch like a movie like The Incredibles, Brad Bird was very good at that, where he used perspective to his advantage, where he wanted you to look at this character, so he made sure that all the vanishing point was at that character, so you knew where your eye was led to a certain spot where he wanted you to look. And so there's a subconscious psychiatry to it, or psychology to it, that I think will apply to anything you do creatively, even sculpture, 3D, anything you do, even floral arrangements. You draw the eye to something. There's ways to do that, and those techniques to make your viewer, whoever it is, experience the art that you want to. But it starts with the basics: composition, life drawing, and perspective.
You have introspect in. Yeah, you were saying.
Oh, and one thing I wish I had studied more in school, because I always thought I wanted to draw funny pictures. So I was a big fan of Peanuts and Charles Schultz and Snoopy and comic strips, but I didn't study creative writing enough, I thought,
Okay.
because that's something that is also, if you're going to be an animator or a cartoonist, you're also going to be writing your characters. You're writing comic strips, you're writing your shorts, you're writing series ideas. There are people that specialize just in writing, but you do have to be a bit of a writer as well, because a lot of shows are done not just from the script, but you're also get an outline and you're writing gags and you're writing dialogue. So creative writing is also something that should be, that I wish I had studied more of.
Right. Someone in the comments has asked what more work goes into animating anime.
Oh, anime. Yeah, yes. Anime is, I am just amazed at some of the work that anime artists do. Studio Ghibli is just amazing, and it's their backgrounds are amazing, their character designs are amazing. There's a certain style of timing that they have too that's really quaint and unique to anime. But again, perspective and characters and humans, they're very stylized, and they're not like a Disney movie or Disney feature where it's everything smooth and timed perfectly. And anime has a certain timing quality to it where it's not perfectly smooth, but it's really, really well drawn. The draftsmanship is amazing in anime. The background painting is phenomenal. The color theory that goes into the art direction that goes into anime, it's just I could just hang a background from Princess Mononoke on my wall and look at it forever because it's just so beautiful.
Right. So I do stand-up comedy, so I know that this is true in that context, but I'm sure it's true in a broader sense as well. When people start out in an art field, even if their work is original, they're usually mirroring someone else's style.
Mm-hmm.
How does an artist find their own style?
That's something that a lot of artists struggle with. I know I struggle with that. I go from different styles, but it kind of evolves. As an animation artist, yes, you are called upon to do to be flexible and work in different styles. When I hire, like right now, I'm staffing up on a new show. When I hire artists, I look at the portfolio first. Like right now, the show I'm working on is a little bit more realistic, so it's stylized human characters. So if I see, if somebody's portfolio has very graphic animals and backgrounds that are like forced perspective and not realistic perspective, but they don't have any realistic humans or realistic perspective in their portfolio, well, I know that wouldn't be right for this show. But if I was hiring on a show, let's say like Dexter's Lab or even I don't know, Apple and Onion or something, and I see that they have more quirky characters and a little more cartoony characters and stylized characters and stylized backgrounds, which don't necessarily follow the rules of perspective, but they break the rules of perspective, then I'll know, okay, this person can do a very stylized show. So it's a bit of casting. So I look for different things. So you do have to be able to adapt to different styles in order to survive as an animation artist. So my own personal style, I'm still working on it. I think it's still evolving. It's kind of hard to look at your own work and go, okay, I know what kind of style I'm doing. It's just what you like to draw. It comes out that way. But I think some of the most successful cartoonists have a certain style that just comes naturally to them, that they like to draw a certain way. Like you can tell a Matt Groening drawing from a Justin Roiland drawing just because of the way, I can tell Justin Roiland has different shows that he's been working on now. So there's a certain aesthetic style to that. The same with Seth MacFarlane. His drawings are American Dad, Family Guy, Cleveland Show. It's very similar in style. Or someone like Mike Judge, who did Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill, his style kind of evolved a little bit, where his latest show, Tales from, I don't know if you've seen this one, I think it only went one season, Tales from the Road was very much realistic human characters, whereas Beavis and Butthead were very stylized characters. King Hill were stylized. So it looks a little bit more like Archer. Something like Archer is like hyper reality, where they're look like comic book characters, but they're actually realistic human proportions. So developing a style is probably the hardest thing. You can't really consciously try to do it. You just have to just draw what you like to draw, and it will evolve.
Right. I think you've answered this question already, but it's in the comments, so I'll ask.
Okay.
How do animators ensure their works are unique across shows? Like Simpsons design should be different from Family Guy, but similar to Disenchantment. I addressed that already, but you can talk about it if you want to.
Oh, yeah. Well, Matt Groening has this distinct style, which goes back to his Life in Hell comic books, and which The Simpsons kind of evolved from that. So he does have that specific style with the larger eyes and the overbite. So that's kind of a trademark character trait of his, where and Family Guy, when it first came out, was compared a lot to The Simpsons, but it was very different. In fact, that on The Simpsons, you didn't have any talking animals or talking babies. Maggie Simpson did not talk. I think she said one word in 30 years. But with Family Guy, the baby was the talking baby, and he kind of became the star character, and they have a talking dog. So it's very different, but it's also, Seth has a very distinct style also, where the characters are they don't move a lot. They're not very bouncy and stretchy, where Simpsons are a little bit more of that. So it's not just like the look, but also the timing of the animation and the style of the certain things that they do. Other shows like Steven Universe, or even South Park. South Park has a very flat style because it was originally designed to be paper cutouts under the camera. That proved to be too time consuming and expensive, so they switched to, they're actually using Maya there's a 3D program they use for South Park. But as far as like the style itself, to keep it from like one series to the next, like Simpsons, Futurama, Disenchantment, they do have that similar style. A lot of it is in the design. Like the character designers are consciously making an effort to make it fit the Matt Groening brand, if you will. And Matt is very much involved in approving all of those characters. So he still has final say, and he will do a draw over if something isn't quite stylistically right. He'll do a draw over and say, okay, this character doesn't have enough of the upper lip, or the eyes aren't big enough. But you do, even in The Simpsons, you see sometimes like some of the celebrity characters are made to look more, they have to look like the celebrity. So sometimes they look a little bit less like a Simpson, like Sting, he from The Police, he looks a little bit more human than the Simpsons do, or even Paul McCartney, I think, looks a little bit more human than the Simpsons. And Matt Groening always had a rule on The Simpsons where the other characters, he said, should not out Simpson the Simpsons. The Simpsons should always be the goofiest characters on the show. Everybody else could look a little bit more realistic, but no one should be funnier looking than the Simpsons.
Right.
So there's always little stylistic rules in there, but it's pretty much the designers, and the design team does a great job on making sure that Matt's vision and Matt's style is realized. So that's where it comes from.
Right. I'll close with the last two questions.
Okay.
If anybody has questions you can put them in the box right now. What are your favorite and least favorite parts of your job as an animation director?
Oh, my favorite part is the acting. I love to to draw the characters to the acting that I hear that the actors do. Sometimes you can hear a little nuance or a little inflection in their voice that you're like, oh, I know exactly what that expression looks like. And that, to me, that's the most fun part. And then when you see it on screen, it's like, oh, it matches, and you really feel like the characters come alive. The part I like the least, I guess, would be anything that's really time consuming, like just the cleanup, I guess. Cleanup, like when you take a rough drawing, I love doing rough drawings because you can be really loose and free with it. But when you have to do a cleanup of a drawing, it means you have to make a really nice, tight line. And a lot of times when I do my own cleanup artwork, the characters tend to get stiff, and I lose all the life from it. So I would rather hand that off to somebody else, because I there are a lot of cleanup artists that just do amazing work, that they add more life to a rough drawing in their cleanup. That's just something I always struggle with. So that's the thing I like least about doing animation. If I ever have to do cleanup art, and it's not so much in the animation itself, it's usually on a design where I have to do really tight line, that it stiffens up and it gets just flat and lifeless.
Right. I'll close with this question because it's almost existential.
Okay.
This is from the comments. This is Sarthak Krishna. What do you think are some boundaries that animated shows are able to breach, which motion pictures usually don't?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I think we accept things from animated characters because they're not in our minds. They're not real people, so you can get away with, I think, a lot more, especially on adult animated shows. Kid shows are different because your audience are children, and we don't want to scare children. We don't want to offend them, or we don't want them learning bad behaviors from our cartoon characters. But so we're always careful of that, and children's animation studios usually have a list of things you can't do, like you can't say, or you can't make sure that you're there. We've had notes like, well, a character can't be near a fire, or they can't play with matches. They can't have a fork near a toaster, that type of thing. But with adult animation, characters can get away with saying things that if a live action human character said in a TV show, you would be shocked and horrified. And just even some of the things Peter Griffin or Homer Simpson say, they sound really stupid, and they're like, oh, it's Homer Simpson, he's a cartoon character. But if a live action actor said that on a TV show, you would just be like, you'd be angry and you'd be offended. But even in South Park too, I think they get away with a lot of stuff that a lot of the Adult Swim shows say things or do things, or something. Even some of the violence in animated adult shows that would be, if you saw it in live action TV show, it would be so much more realistic that you'd be horrified. But with a chicken fight, you can have Peter beating up a chicken and getting bloody all over the place, and it's funny. Where it's not funny is if you saw it on live action.
Yeah,
it would be horrifying and disgusting. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest boundary, or biggest difference that, and you can in animation you can also have messages, and I think there's the best messages are ones that are not necessarily like just right there in front of you and it's like, you should think like this because I said so in my cartoon. But if it's woven into the story and it makes you think, and if it's an issue that's in the news, or if it's a social issue, and if it's constructed carefully and thoughtfully in an entertaining way, and your audience doesn't really, it's kind of woven in, and your audience then will look at it and go, huh, I didn't think of that, or that's an interesting way of thinking of that, or that's a good point. But if you are writing it in a way that's like, you should think like this because this character says this, then audiences are like, I'm not going to vote because Homer Simpson said I should. But I think it's a very powerful medium, though, I think, to get messages across and what you really want to say.
Right. I think we'll close with that. Thank you so much for joining us. This was such an insightful talk.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the sneak peek animation that we got to see.
Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.
Definitely. And I'm sure based on the comments, I think everyone here enjoyed it as well. Thank you everyone who watched and everyone who was part of organizing this. Peter, do you have any closing notes before we end?
I would just like to say thank you so much for having me, inviting me to speak at the Quark series. It's always an honor for me, and unfortunately, right now with the pandemic, we have to meet virtually, and I wish I could be there in person with everybody and meet with everybody. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody today. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Neil, I think you gotta close it now.